thanks again to Jess for creating this challenge for us. So we've got a slightly more granular data set for this week's challenge, but very similar data to last week. And the first thing we're told is that the date returned and the date sold might be the wrong way around. So we should probably identify cases where that's the case and fix those issues. So I chose to do this with a calculation, kind of separate calculations. So just made a field that's looking at whether or not we have a problem. Is the date sold after the date returned? And we can see that we either get true, false, or null. So null is where the item hasn't been returned, so we're not worried about those. So if we take a look at the true ones, check that that's identifying it correctly. Yep. We are not happy with something being sold on the 31st of May and then being returned on the 4th of April. That doesn't make sense. So we need to swap those two values around. So I created two separate calculator fields to fix that. So I created a new field called order date rather than date sold. So if issue is true, then date returned, else keep it as date sold. And then exactly the same thing basically for the return date. So if the issue is true, then we take the date sold, else we keep the date returned. And then we can get rid of the original fields and that issue column that we created, and we're left with all of our data now should be correct, and all of those order and return dates should make sense. So next up we want to work out how many days it takes for items to be returned. So that involves a date diff calculation. So it's quite a calculation heavy challenge, this one. So we're doing the date diff in day between the order date and the return date. And that will give us our how many days is between the order date and the return date. And then we have those rules in the challenge as to what the return value should be. So if an item is returned within the first 60 days, it's a full refund. If it's within 100 days, then it's half refund, so rounding that to 2 decimal places, and then otherwise it's a 0 that they get for that refund. And then of course anything that hasn't been returned is just still going to have a null in this field. So that's what we've got going on in that calculation. And then our workflow branches off into two. So the first branch, we're just keeping the returned items, and then we're totaling up the value, so that field we just created, the return value field, and we're grouping it by month. So the return date by month, because that's when the money gets paid out. We're summing up the number of rows so we know how many returns have been made, and we're also doing the average of the days to return field as well, so that we know on average how long it takes for returns to be made. And then we're just getting rid of any null values because in January I think there are no returns that are being made, and we're just doing a little bit of renaming of all of those fields so that we get to this state where we've got the return date, the total returns value, the number of returns, and the average days to return. And then in our branch over here we're just doing, we're grouping by the order date month, and then we're summing up the prices. We're just rounding those values to 2 decimal places, and then we're ready to join these two data sets back together. So where the return date equals the order date, make sure that we don't lose the January revenue. So it needs to be, in my case, a right join. And then just go ahead and remove unnecessary fields, rename fields, and this is the output data for this challenge. So thanks again to Jess for this challenge, and thanks very much for watching.